She's ready to join us. Here she is. It is Esther.
Ah,
Hi,
it's
Esther.
Esther.
This time as a presenter, not as a host. So
Oh,
it
that is
feels like it's been ages since I've been on the presenting side of Azure Thursday. So awesome to be here again tonight, guys. Thanks.
We're
cool. So
very
what
glad
was the
you're doing
last
a
time?
session now. Yeah. Sorry, Hank.
What was the last time you were here? That was
I think June last year.
I think it was
April,
longer
June?
ago. I think it was with Freek, right? Because in June, that was the
Yeah.
your hosting premiere.
Oh yeah, that episode.
That one.
That one that everyone still talks about. Yes.
Oh, we do still talk about it. Yeah, that was exciting.
so
Yes,
perfect.
it
But
is.
I know Esther. Roland, you know Esther. Some of the audience might know Esther, but for those who wouldn't know Esther, we have some lightning questions to get to know her a little bit better.
Well,
And hopefully,
fire away.
I also come to learn something. So let's start with these questions. And Roland, feel free to think of an awkward question, because this is like the chance that we have to get an answer on it. So the first one is an easy one. And
Okay.
that is, what was your first computer?
386. I was a
Really?
late bloomer, to be honest. No, I did. Well, that was my first computer. So my dad did bring home. I'm not entirely sure. Well, he did bring home a computer from work, so he started my interest in IT because I didn't understand one thing of making that computer work for me. So I decided to just follow a master's in computer science and make that thing work for me. And at
Perfect.
the end of my master's, I still did not know how to program, but at least it did work a little bit for me. So mission half accomplished.
Perfect. So then we kind of also know your age. So 360.
Oh, that was your subtle way of asking about my age. Okay.
Yes. So next one. It is about programming languages.
Okay.
I know you program a little bit in your
Yes.
job. Yes. So what was the program language that you used last?
Bicep.
Bicep.
But
And what
yeah,
was,
that's not really a programming language. But I usually call myself a scripter, not a programmer. So it's Bicep and PowerShell.
Bicep and PowerShell. But what was your first programming language?
Pascal.
Ah, yes. My
Cool.
And that was on a pre-master's course where they invited all the women that were gonna do the computer science masters to have like a week of boot camp. So that's my first introduction to programming. So we had to do. Do I still remember? Oh, I think it was like a measurement for curtains program kind of thing.
Mhm.
I'm not entirely sure. It was very educational.
And did you ever do it afterwards, Pascal?
No, to be honest, no. Well, I think I tried because one of my roommates was very heavily invested in Delphi, so I tried to understand that too, but that didn't work out so well for me. So
There are some great meetups about Delphi in the
yes.
Netherlands.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I ever get homesick about programming in Delphi, I'll definitely look them up.
Oh, perfect. So, final question. We know
Okay.
you do a lot with Azure.
Yes.
So I want to know what you're going to skill up and next. What is the next thing you're going to learn in the Azure space?
Wow.
Like kind of that service that you know is there.
Yes.
You really need or want to know it, but you're like, oh, I will do that later, kind of type.
Oh yeah, there are so many laters and topics on my backlog to be really honest. But the one thing that I definitely want to invest in is Azure Monitoring, especially because I think it would be really awesome to be able to use the native Azure Monitoring in combination with Azure Virtual Desktops in my case, which is my main focus area, to be more proactively in creating automated responses to monitoring alerts. But that's like a pet project that might not happen till later this year.
Yeah, it sounds really useful. Is then Azure Monitor, is that then the monitoring system where you can also write custom queries against?
Yeah, so it's like a combination of the log analytics and I know for AVD there are now special monitoring configurations, so that already helps. But yeah, that's mostly the performance metrics monitoring.
Perfect. So now we know you a little bit better,
Yes.
and we gave Roland like a few minutes time now to come up with one question.
Oh, but I forgot the moment you said this is our final question.
Sorry, I know you want to ask one question.
Always. Have you ever regretted learning a certain programming skill because then you got constantly bugged by your coworkers because you were the something something guru?
Oh, no. Um, no, because well, basically at the beginning it was like ASP.NET scripting, and I never felt like a guru. I always felt like the noob, because my first code review with the web application that we were building, I had this conversation with my colleague, and that started with just one simple question, which was, Esther, have you ever heard about functions? That one keeps me very down to the ground up to today. So that's the first question with every project that I basically ask myself: have you ever heard about functions? And then I force myself to make sure that any repeatable tasks is translated into a function first. And the other thing is that I really love to share my knowledge and experience, and I get excited about troubleshooting. So whenever people ask me to help them and to look at their code or to do a review or to do some troubleshooting why things aren't working, I just get excited that we're on like a puzzle adventure. So
Very
it
cool.
won't bother me that much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a very good answer. Yeah, thank you.
So in the meantime, I fixed our website
Oh,
because someone didn't update the YouTube code and embedded a video from last month,
Oh,
which was
wow.
oh, nice.
also a great session. But
Definitely.
so everyone who's watching on YouTube, if you want to go to the website, it works. And welcome to all the new viewers that were waiting for the video to start on the website. So, but I think we took enough time from you. So now you have definitely like 40 minutes to do your presentation, because
Yes,
I
I'll
will have
speed up.
questions afterwards.
That's good to know.
Perfect. So share your screen
Okay.
and take it away.
Yeah, I will. So for those of you who already had a sneak peek at the agenda, you know that tonight I want to talk about transitioning from ops to DevOps. And I basically said how to keep fun in your work, just as a teaser, because of course there's so much more. And I don't mean to in any way imply that work currently is not fun at all. But that's just to get started and get you all excited about my presentation tonight. So for those of you who still do not know me after the lightning questions from Roland and Henk, My name is Esther Barthel. I've been a technical consultant for over 20 years. Not trying to age myself too much. Mostly focused on end user computing. Started out administrating all the way up to designing, implementing, and like I said, most fun with troubleshooting. And some of you may also know me from different community programs like the CTP, MVP, very recently VMware vExpert, and I'm one of the founding members and founding leaders of the Citrix user group community Women in Tech mentorship program. And we couldn't make that name any longer, but it's definitely a lot of fun to be able to give back to the community and help other women in tech be more visible, be more, have more self-esteem, more power to be a presence in this community and to share all the technical fun that we have on a daily basis. And last but not least, for the last couple of years, I've been shifting more from implementing end-user computing environments to DevOps and automation, focusing on REST API interfaces, JSON, having some PowerShell fun, because that, of course, is the scripting language that you can wake me up in the middle of the night for. Always love adding some PowerShell to the mix. Today, I want to focus on, as I mentioned at the beginning, DevOps, and especially share with you some of the lessons that I learned transitioning from an ops background, being a full force administrator, to a more cloud DevOps focused role. Just to give you a heads up, this is not a presentation that is focusing on all the tools and all the skills that you need to instantly be that cloud DevOps expert, but it's much more to make you aware of that it does take a different mindset and focus a bit more on the processes and the changes that you'll probably see happen in your daily work. So as I mentioned, DevOps. So for me, at first, when I heard about DevOps, and especially if you look at the definition, it basically tells you that it's a combination of development and operations, which for me still doesn't very clearly explain what the focus is. So my first question basically started on, so where do I need to position DevOps if we have this scale from Dev on the one side and Ops on the other side? And to me, it felt definitely that DevOps leans more to the developer side, and I'll explain that a bit later on in this presentation, than definitely being a 50-50 deal. And as I mentioned, I'll definitely explain that some more, because once again, usually when you mention DevOps, people instantly think about all the tools and all the cool methods that are out there and are basically shared under this, well, almost container word called DevOps. So once again, tonight, it's not all about explaining you all the different DevOps tooling methods. I want to first focus on the DevOps processes, because for me personally, that was a real challenge to fully understand. And I'll quickly dive into what I mean when I talk about DevOps processes. So from my background, starting as an administrator, becoming an engineer and a solutions architect, most projects were usually done with the waterfall method, which means that you just have these clear phases in your project where you just focus on one single aspect of the entire implementation and build. So first you start with designing, then you start, based on your functional and technical designs, start to build the actual solution, and then you basically have your pilot phase, your release phase, your first release, or the let's take this to production moment, where in the end you are testing the added value for the user. what you see nowadays, especially if we're talking about DevOps and modern teams or tribes within companies, is that it's going for a much more agile approach. And if you look at agile, in the bottom screen of the slide, you see that that's a more iterative process where you have smaller sized define, build, and release cycles. And that means that you have multiple moments during your project or during the life cycle of your solution where you check if you still are on point on user expectations, on functional requirements, and basically you have multiple moments where you check that added value. And for those of you who are a bit aged by now in the IT sector, this picture might explain it a lot better than the 1,000 words that I could spend on this one. At least that this was one of the this is how project managers and different viewpoints of a functional requirement is looked at. So I decided to use that famous let's build a swing on a tree functional requirement for explaining waterfall versus agile. So what you see is that with the waterfall method, you start building a design based on the functional requirement, translate that into your design, you build, you do some testing, and in the end, what you see is well, the best solution based on the fact that during testing we discovered that the swing couldn't go back and forth because there was a tree in the middle. So we definitely solved that testing challenge. With Agile, what you see is that it's a much more that iterative process where you start first with, I don't even want to call it a swing, because some people might have different associations with it. But as you go along and check with users if it's usable, whether you need to add more functionality to it, you see that it's developing into something that in the end probably is better meeting the user expectations than the first waterfall project. So does that mean that waterfall is basically legacy when we're talking about projects? That's not entirely the message that I want to share today. I still think that a waterfall method can be applied, but like the slide says, it's better for simple projects where you don't expect a lot of changes in maybe user expectations, functional requirements. If it's like very clear from the beginning, then agile might be a bit too much and waterfall will fit just fine. And what you see in agile is that it especially supports those continuous cycles and is a bit more flexible and more based on a natural evolution of building a solution or product. And the other thing that at least was something that was an eye opener for me is that it also has a different hierarchy or structure from the persons in the project. So as you can see, waterfall is very hierarchical, where agile it's much more a team, so to speak. And talking about teams, I think that's a great way to go to, well, not just explaining agile in how the process works, but to focus a bit more on how nowadays we implement agile and Scrum in the new tribes and teams way of work, where we're talking a lot about having these short cycles, usually 1 to 4 weeks, called sprints, to work on particular feature sets of our solution. And what you see, especially with Agile Scrum, is that there are 3 very important roles within the project. So you have your Scrum Master, who's much more facilitating, making sure that all the non-technical stuff is handled. So that means we can focus on the real fun stuff. We have our product owner to make sure that any requirements that are there basically on the product backlog is being introduced and planned within our sprint. And ourselves in the development team or the DevOps team, we of course have a great say and a lot of influence on all the items that will be placed on our sprint backlog, because those are the task or the work items that we commit and definitely see manageable, creatable within those 4 weeks. Once again, like I said, these are the 3 main roles within a Scrum team. And what I love best is that in this case, the focus of the team is not to make sure that we all are the best scripters in the world, but it's much more of realizing that the magic of the team or the added value in the team is to make sure that it's a cross-discipline team. So you can work together and enhance the solution and the product that you're building by having these different viewpoints on creating a solution or tackling some of the challenges within the project. One other thing, and I know a lot of people do not have best associations with the word daily Scrum, because it can easily transition to like a nice coffee chat in the morning and doesn't feel like it has a lot of added value to the work that needs to be done. But what I personally learned about having a very effective daily Scrum is those 3 questions that's basically all you need to address. So what did I did yesterday? What will I do today? And what is in my way? And I especially want to focus on that question, because at first it kind of felt like, why do I need to answer these 3 questions? What's the added value? But I also learned from personal experience that I am not the best. I'm not very good. Let's phrase it like that. I'm not very good at asking for help, because I just tend to get hyper focused and really like troubleshooting mode. Really want to find the fix for any challenges that I see. I want to solve that puzzle. But by having to answer these 3 questions, it does create that moment within a team that people can offer the help that you might need. Because whenever I need to speak out loud what is in my way, and I'm very open and honest about it, that I'm dealing with this impediment or this problem that I haven't fixed yet, or that I don't have a solution for yet, that is the window of opportunity for everyone else in the team to say, hey, I might just have a solution for that, because I think I faced a similar problem maybe last week, maybe the week before. I will give you a call after this meeting and show you what I did to solve it, or work with you to find a solution. So if you approach your daily Scrum much more open-minded, and do not get me wrong, it does require your team and your Scrum team to feel like a safe place where you can be very open and honest about the work you're doing and any struggles you might have. But if it's that open and safe place and you have the opportunity, just make sure that you are open about the what's in my way, and give the other members in the team the opportunity to offer help, even especially if you're not very good at asking for help. Because you never know, it might even enhance your experience, creativity, and knowledge. One other thing, if we're talking about differences in the way of work, especially from an administrative point of view, where we're more focused on incident management and problem management, and making sure that, in my case, infrastructure keeps running smooth and without any hiccups. What I see with the Agile Scrum way, especially more project focused, is that it's very important to understand that the way you approach your work items is more in a prototyping or minimum viable product kind of way. And that means that it's a more open to experiment, to not just think that you need that one solution, but to just check if an idea that you're having that might enhance a functionality in the product or solution, you can test it within this phase. Just build that prototype, change your code, see if that works, have a few tests, and if it doesn't work, well, at least it's a lesson learned. Just go back to a previous state and start over with a different solution, or maybe even a whole different function. So that's why I wanted to make sure that I zoomed in on prototyping and minimum viable product, because the minimum viable product usually is the start point in your sprint, where you say, okay, if we at least include these feature sets and this functionality within our solution or product, then we're good to go. We can already start onboarding users, and with the next sprint and with the next iteration, we'll add more features and make that user experience richer and richer. But that allows you already to have your product life cycle really kick off, instead of having to wait till you have all the features implemented before you even start introducing it to your users. So definitely find some time to understand those two types of approaching the work, and just be creative, have a bit of fun with it. Yes, I mentioned at the beginning, it's more about processes, less about tools. But in this section, I still wanted to make sure that you understand some of the basic concepts of the DevOps tooling that we have, because I think it's very important to understand, especially coming from an administrative or operational background, to understand that the focus in DevOps and Agile Scrum teams is all about collaboration. And we have some rule sets for how we can best collaborate within the team. And that focuses specifically on centralized storage, like repositories, the ability to still have your own testing environment where you can edit and test your code, and also the opportunity to give back to the team, or basically share any code that you feel comfortable with and that you see as your finished product. This all is supported with something called source control, or usually known by most of us as Git or GitHub. So I have a quick cheat sheet that I created to make sure that I understand all these Git terminology, and especially how to translate that to the source control. Because what it is all about is that source control enables us to work together on the same code without basically having to deal with locked files, or someone not being there anymore. So what it does, it is, and I'm quickly gonna switch to the laser point just to, instead of pointing at the screen, at least have you with me in jumping around the picture. So source control, as I mentioned before, is all about a remote repository. So that is your centralized place for the entire team to keep track of the current version, or maybe even a current release of your solution or product. So this is where you store everything, and that can be in a GitHub repository, it can be in Azure DevOps repository, but at least it's a central place that you all agreed upon within the team to store the code that you're working on. But as I mentioned before, it's also very important to be able to have a local copy, so you don't have to interfere with other people's code. So you can easily clone a copy of that repository to your local system or your working environment. That can even be a virtual desktop if you love to be more modern about it and more. Well, no, I'm just not going to go there. That's a whole different topic, talking about virtual desktops. So this working copy allows me to make changes to the code and to keep track of those changes, basically version control. I can commit that code, those changes, to my local repository, my local copy. And the commit, I usually explain that, but that's maybe me and my virtual desktop background. I usually explain it as like a snapshot of your code. So the commit allows me to have that moment in time, that particular version of my coding, and it allows me to, in case some future tests or coding changes are not working, allows me to exactly go back to that state of my code. To make sure that I also am able to share that code with the others in my team, there needs to be a mechanism that allows me to basically push the code back to the remote repository. And now we're talking about the situation where I'm making sure that any changes that I made to my local repository, my local code, is being pushed back to that remote repository. And that means that everyone else in the team can now also use that same code. And of course, there, as multiple people can work on the code in this remote repository, there also needs to be a mechanism that allows me to be able to copy those changes from others in the remote repository back to my local system. And that's with as I explained in the beginning, we can do a clone, but that's like an entire copy, and that creates a whole new folder. So now I have like multiple versions on my machine again, but I can also easily do a pull where I basically send the information from the central repository, any changes, back to my local system. So both of them are in sync. And with that word, I definitely have the last command, because sync is like making sure that changes on both sides are synchronized between the two environments, both the remote and the local repository. So hopefully this gives you a bit of better understanding of what the intent and the idea behind source control is. So it's not just versioning, but it's definitely very important to have all this in place to collaborate as a team. Moving on to the next section, and this is going to be a lot of fun too. And it might feel like I'm adding a lot of processes and a lot of actions that don't feel natural. But if you bear with me, it all makes a bit more sense. So in addition to source control that I already explained, which is all about the central repository and your local copy of the code, we also have something that is called branches. And a branch basically allows me to create similar like a clone, but it allows me to have others continue on the same track, so to speak, with their coding on the same set of code, but I create a branch of that code. And that allows me to make changes and to have like a different version of that code that is an entity on its own. So, like I said, it starts with creating a branch. Then you have that same process again of adding, committing your changes in your repository, syncing those back to the centralized repository that now has it linked to your created branch. And then the next step could be that moment where you want to make sure that all those changes that you created within this branch is synchronized back or basically pushed back to that main track. So that's basically ending this side track and getting back on the main track again. And the way we're doing that, or the word or the terminology that is used for that, is creating a pull request. And a pull request basically is that request where you say, I want all changes in this branch, this track, merged with the main track, for instance. So that's the main line at the top. And what especially is important about that pull request is that it allows for the other members in the team to review your code, or maybe even have a discussion on the changes that you made and why you think it is improving the main branch. Once that discussion is completed, everyone approves the changes that you made and think we are definitely improving the product, then that's the moment where the merge happens, and basically the life cycle of this branch ends, and we continue with the main branch. So why is it important to understand this branching strategy? And I just picked one of the branching strategies that are out there, like GitHub Flow or GitHub, or Git Flow, for instance. And I'll explain that because this really focuses on the fact that you are working and collaborating in a team. So that means that sometimes multiple people will work at the same time on the same code base. And to make sure that any testing that you are doing of your particular changes will not interfere with any changes or any code that anyone else is using and maybe changing at the same time, it is advised to use these different branches to create those multiple branches so you can focus on your particular changes without having that interfering with the main process. So that means that the primary branch, in this case the blue line, is focusing on the main releases or the main versions of the product. So only when I'm doing a new release to production, this will definitely get a new commit and a new stage. And whenever I need, for instance, to apply a hotfix, I'll make sure to create a new branch, make the changes that the hotfix requires to the code, have the ability to test those changed codes, and then bring it back into the main branch as a new release that can be pushed to production. Same with development. Once I have, for instance, and I guess this will make it even a bit more clear, for instance, I can use the development branch to create a branch for each and every sprint that we start. So that means that all the changes and all the work items within that sprint are easily logged with these different branches. And once those sprints are finished, in this case, it's even taking multiple sprints. Then we bring that code back with the pull request and a merge to the main branch and have a new release for production. And the same basically goes within the development branch to, for instance, for each and every work item, to create your own user branch or work item branch that allows you to focus and to know that you're the only person right now that is making these changes to the code. So that allows you to easily test your changes without having to worry about any other changes that might break the functionality, or maybe even um, make it harder for you to troubleshoot on your own functionality and code. Hopefully, once again, this all makes a bit more sense. So to summarize it, when we're talking about branching strategies, usually you have your main branch that has the very stable code, the versions that you're releasing. You have your release branches, which are like short-lived branches to make sure that you can focus on hot fixes or specially mark release moments. And once those branches or the branch is finished or the work is finished, you use your pull request to bring it back, in this case, to the main branch. And of course, there's the development branch that keeps continuing. And as you can see, it even ensures that the hotfix is, in this case, not just added to the main branch, but also incorporated in your development to make sure that with the next sprint, you also have that hotfix included in your code. Another thing to focus on, and I do realize that it's almost time for me to finish off the presentation, because I definitely am still curious what other questions there might be. Automation is key. And my translation, particularly about automation, is pipelines. And the way I see or translated pipelines, if we're talking about DevOps, is that it's all about workflows. And of course, a workflow can be started by different events or triggers or a schedule, but the main focus is a workflow, which consists of one or more jobs, and each job describes a group or one or multiple steps in it. And a step is nothing more than just a particular action that you perform. And the cool part about pipelines is that each job can run on its own separate runner or agent, whatever the terminology is used by the most popular tools out there. Just to give you a practical example of a workflow, this is just me creating. I like to make the workflows very visual, because then it also allows people that are not experts in scripting or programming to still add to the conversation, because this way it's just very visual which steps I'm taking, which actions. And what I did is I configured this workflow in 4 separate steps, which allows me to assign different runners and different phases to the workflow. As you can see, different runners and even a final action. The other challenge that I had with workflows, without just deep diving into it right away, is what I love about splitting it up in different sections or phases with separate runners, is that you can easily use artifacts to exchange information between those different phases. So that should definitely keep you open-minded on being very phased about your workflows, and not just have this one massive workflow that you need to maintain. The other thing that, so once again, like I said, different phases, put them in different stages in this case, translated that. And if I zoom in on each and every workflow, I can easily translate or identify the different steps, detailed steps within the workflow to, in this case, a PowerShell script that will perform those steps. And the artifact, the document that will be created and that can be passed on to the next one. Just stepping a bit faster through this, because I think Barbara will also zoom in on the workflow and the pipelines in her session. So I don't want to steal away from her time as well. So this is just me showing you how important it basically is to put some comments in your scripts and coding, because this allows me to easily identify that this section of code is linked to this particular step that checks if a disk has any free unallocated space. And that makes it easier for those members in your project that might not be very experienced in the scripting language to still follow which steps you are performing and whether or not there might be something wrong in the workflow design that you created and everything is based on. One last thing I wanted to focus on before I end the presentation is everything as code. So what you hear nowadays, especially from the operational side focus on DevOps, is that we want to make sure that we are able to deploy our infrastructure as code, virtual desktop images as code, maybe even the workspace configuration as code. And what you're seeing is that it's very easy to or start with focusing too much on the tools itself. I did mention them in the beginning. So an example of infrastructure as code is, for instance, HashiCorp Terraform. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is because the focus of as code is that you're using some form of configuration file as your base. Basically, it's like template-based declarative coding that basically states, this is the end result that I want. Please, Terraform, make it happen. And the cool thing about Terraform is that it, of course, can deploy your infrastructure in on-premises hypervisors like VMware vCenter, but also public clouds like Azure. So that's why it's smart to mention it in this presentation. Of course, being very enthusiastic about Bicep, I did want to put a slide in there, but I'll quickly skip over this one because, of course, Barbara is going to talk about Bicep as well. So let's not focus too much on that one. Just a few more minutes, and then we're going to learn everything we need to know about Bicep. And the cool part about once you start building these workflows and start with infrastructure as code, it becomes easier to add multiple workflows to it, or to even create one pipeline that starts and then builds on to a next pipeline and have these little phases in there. So in this example, for instance, it's all about combining image as code, creating that virtual desktop image, and then using the infrastructure as code to make sure that all the compute is ready to go and that virtual image is linked to the compute that you configured in Azure. Once again, the code is your focus point, and all the other tools are supportive of deploying that code into your cloud infrastructure. And I guess by now you understand where I want to go. So if you get more enthusiastic, more experience with the everything as code idea, then it becomes easier to build these massive creative pipelines that enable you to instantly deploy your infrastructure, deploy maybe even your application layer on top of that, and have some automated testing in place as well before you are able to release it from your development and testing stages to production. So that makes it a full circle moment, because of course I still wanted to get back to this slide, not to overwhelm you with all these tools out there, but to basically see this as a challenge to be creative and know that there are so many different tools that will make life easier for an automated deployment of whatever cool processes, workflows you have in mind and want to build. So hopefully this gives you a great starting point to feel a bit more confident about changing from an operational focus to a more DevOps focused role, and have lots of fun coding, maybe not even coding, but supporting the testing, supporting the user interactions within the cross-discipline team. So thank you very much for having me, and back to the studio. Hopefully there's still a bit time to address some questions.
I think we have a lot of time for questions and feedback as well.
Awesome.
Um, Thank you, Esther. It was such a nice session. It is, it is so. You mentioned so much in correlation to each other, and those are all things I always forget to mention. I come from a software development point of view, and
Yeah.
um, most of this we've done this for years, and we all forget why we're doing it and how it all fits together. And you showed it, yeah, beautifully. So thank you.
Yeah, well, that's one of the experience that I have with customers that I've been visiting these days or having projects at these days, is that especially from an operational background, it does require us to have really a change of mindset. And sometimes all these development focused tools can be very overwhelming to fully understand. And I did see and I experienced it myself as well, that it can the struggle to understand the tools and how to use it. I especially struggled with GitHub for a long time. Still, I think understanding pull requests is something that just was like my light bulb moment like 2 or 3 months ago, where I finally realized, especially with the whole branching, oh, this, I can make this work for me instead of having this strong struggle to understand it and to see the added value. So yeah, I'm very happy to to share that light bulb moment with the community.
Yeah, that's great. Well, there are some questions also regarding branching strategy because
Ah,
I think Hank has mentioned this one. Yes, Mark asks, do you have any advice for choosing a branching strategy?
yes. So the biggest advice is to keep it as simple as possible, because as I already tried to explain it in like 2 minutes, you notice that it's so much terminology and it's talking about different branches, and it's very hard to keep track of that. Those bullets are basically your commits that create like a branch, and then um, the end of a branch and merging it back to basically a different branch. That becomes very quickly confusing. So I know I zoomed in on the GitHub flow, but and I have to admit that I'm not fully aware which one is the more um, inclusive one, but
That
one
is
of
the
them
GitHub
is
flow.
just focused. Yeah, I think one of them is just best to use if you only have to worry about one version of your releases. But if you need to support multiple releases, then I think Gitflow is the better one, because that allows you also to have that release branch that allows you to keep track of different releases and be able to do like backwards supportability, stuff like that. But yeah, the main advice is keep it as simple as possible. So what I see in cloud infrastructure focused project, for instance, is what I explained in the beginning, is that at the start of each sprint, they create their basically development branch, they create a sprint branch, and each user that picks up a work item creates its own branch from that sprint branch. And then at the end, they have like a pull request meeting where everyone has the opportunity to discuss and to present the pull requests. And then at the end of the sprint, all the code is merged. And then one final test to see if everything works. And then you can go through all the different stages, testing, acceptance, and then bring it to production.
And that's a very good tip. I like it, the pull request meeting, because that is an excellent opportunity for knowledge sharing. That's very cool.
Yes, because, well, I know from personal experience, we're not always very good at documenting, and that allows for everyone in the team to learn from each other's solution. but also to ask a couple of questions, and then you can still decide to deny or approve a pull request. But at least that gives a more open discussion, definitely.
Very cool. There were more questions. A simple one. Can we download the presentation from Sunday?
I'll definitely make sure to upload the presentation to one of my GitHub repos and make sure that I share the link. I'll use Twitter and do a reply or a retweet of this session.
Cool. We'll look out
Yes.
for it. A long one from Paco.
Ah,
Do you follow any naming convention for branch names?
nice. So the only naming conventions that we did in that cloud project that I mentioned is that we have the subfolder or the sub. So we have all sprint branches just start with sprint and then the number of the sprint that we're working on. And for each work item, we basically put them in a users folder, and you start with the user initials and then just a descriptive way. So I have some users that use their initials and then just say sprint with the same number, because that's easy for them to understand. Okay, I'm now focusing on the work items in the sprint. But I usually like to use my initials and then state on which functionality I'm working on. So that could just be adding application X to the virtual desktop image, something like that, just in a
Cool.
small. So there's not, like, naming convention might be a bit strong, but yeah, we definitely try to make it understandable, readable.
Cool. In the end, it usually is do what works for you and what gives you the most flexibility in your process. Because of course there are other ways to tie in your requirements and user stories to your branches, but I don't think
Yes,
we'll
and
get into that.
yeah, especially if you, for instance, you're using Azure DevOps, what you see is that it's easy with the pull request to link them to your working items. So that also allows you to keep track of what the progress and the status of your working items is within a sprint.
Cool. Do we have time for one last question, Hank?
The best question.
It's our question.
Oh,
Exactly.
What is the
where
one
should we
thing we need to
start?
start doing tomorrow?
Oh, wow. Um, Well, I know where I need to start. I need to start uploading the presentation, and then I can easily refer you to the presentation. No, I think the, the um, the best advice to start is to just start using VS Code and Git together. Create your own. You can even create a private repository on GitHub, for instance. So that's free of charge, and start playing around with the commits, with the pulls and the pushes. Understand those mechanisms, because at least at the beginning, especially if you're on your own, it feels like such an overhead. But for me, it was the biggest eye opener to stop creating all these folders on my hard drive that had like date stamps in them, which still do not make much sense. Because that is no way indicating whether it was a successful created code or just rubbish. But that was my um, placebo effect, so to say, to think that I was doing some versioning on my own. But definitely use Git as your source control and versioning, because it will make life a lot easier.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing this amazing session. And you exactly filled the entire hour. So I think
Yeah.
we now have to go to Barbara as soon as possible.
Definitely.
So
Yep.
thank you so much, Esther. And of course, we'll see you next month, the next Azure First Day. Thank you.
Definitely. Okay, so thank you for having me, and enjoy the session with Barbara, because I'm now tuning in for sure, because I'm very curious about all the bicep stuff.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.